Frank held the drawing, his hands shaking so much the paper rustled. And under the flashlight, it seemed alive, the girl's eyes blinking, her mouth whispering. The syringe gleaming like reality, making nausea surge. His stomach twisting as if stabbed. The horror was now tangible, no longer vague sounds or scratches, but a direct testament from Eleanor. A tortured child drawing her fear before vanishing that fateful December 1968 night. She drew this. In room 213, Frank whispered, his voice breaking in the dark, his hand stroking the drawing as if to comfort a lost soul. The tall man with the syringe, Shirley Albright, symbolizing the brutal therapies Abernathy described. Electroshock, brain surgeries, unbearable pain. The drawing wasn't just an image. It was a plea, the final piece of a story the building hid. Frank felt a chill spread from the drawing to his hand, as if Eleanor touched him through the crude pencil strokes, and he swallowed hard to stay calm, his mind reeling with images of a young girl huddled in a corner, drawing her terror under flickering fluorescent lights. He tucked the drawing into his jacket pocket, his hands shaking, and stood, sweeping the flashlight around rats skittered in the dark corner. And a faint whisper from a distant vent, "Help me." Frank spun, the beam hitting the shelves. But there was nothing, just writhing darkness and swirling dust. He left the archive, slamming the rusted iron door with an echoing bang, and ran up the stairs, nearly tripping on the rotting wood. Back at the security station, he collapsed into the cracked leather chair, pulling out the drawing to examine under the dim yellow desk lamp. The drawing weighed heavy in his hands like a curse. And Frank knew he'd found the key, but opening that door might drag him to hell. The building whispered louder, speaking through the child's strokes. "He's coming. Help me." Frank huddled in the dark, waiting for dawn. But the obsession deepened, and Eleanor was no longer the past, she was alive, calling from the rotting pages on October 17th, 2025. Frank Harlan patrolled the dark corridors of Blackwood Creek Psychiatric Hospital, his military flashlight sweeping the cold gray stone walls, illuminating cracks like dried veins and abandoned patient rooms with rusted, twisted metal beds like relics of a brutal era. The Gothic building seemed to tighten its grip, the air stifling with old disinfectant and a faint metallic blood scent from the vent, making each breath labored. His heart pounded, cold sweat trickling down his spine despite the 4 degrees Celsius chill. And Eleanor's childlike drawing with its crying girl and syringe-wielding man felt heavy in his pocket, like an inescapable curse. Abernathy's warning echoed, "It doesn't want you there. It wants you as its eternal guard." And Frank felt the building alive, breathing, waiting for him to falter in the dark. He decided to patrol more, no longer staying in the security station. The obsession with Eleanor and Albright drove him to confront, to find more evidence to break the curse, though each step on the peeling tile floor felt like walking on graves. The flashlight swept Wing B, a rarely mentioned area in the files, with cramped patient rooms, doors ajar or half-closed, revealing dangling chains like torture tools. His heart raced, ears straining, wind whistling through broken windows like gasping breaths, distant dripping pipes like bare footsteps, and a faint whisper from the old speaker, "Help me." Frank stopped, sweeping the flashlight into a dark room at the corridor's end, its door half open, feeling watched from the shadows within. Suddenly, a small object rolled out from the dark room, an old glass marble, scratched with swirling green-red patterns, rolling slowly across the peeling tile floor, clinking softly but echoing in the heavy silence. It rolled straight to Frank, stopping at his feet. As if pushed by an invisible hand, terror surged, nearly making him scream. His heart pounding like war drums, and he stepped back. The flashlight hitting the marble, the first physical event before his eyes. No longer vague sounds or scratches, but a real, tangible object rolling from the dark like a deadly invitation. He knelt, trembling hands picking it up. A chilling sensation spreading from his fingers to his arm, as if the marble were alive and under the flashlight. He saw faint etched letters, E.V. Eleanor Vance. Frank stood abruptly, sweeping the flashlight into the dark room empty. Just dust and cobwebs, no signs of intrusion. But he felt a cold hand brush his shoulder. Like a breath whispering at his neck, he spun. The beam hitting the empty corridor, but the speaker nearby whispered, "Help me. He's coming." Frank let out a short yell, his voice breaking in the dark, and ran to the security station, clutching the marble like burning evidence. Back in the cracked leather chair, he scribbled shakily in his notebook. Marble rolled from dark room in wing B. Etched E.V., cold hand on shoulder, first physical event, writing done. He examined the marble under the dim yellow lamp, and it seemed to gleam like Eleanor's eyes in the drawing. Pleading from the past, the obsession now had substance, not just sounds but objects. And Frank knew the building was toying with him, pulling him deeper into Eleanor and Albright's curse. The clock read 3 a.m., 3 hours until dawn. But Frank sat huddled in the dark, the marble heavy in his hand like a deadly invitation. And Eleanor was no longer a victim she was hunting him from. Blackwood Creek's shadows on October 18th, 2025. Frank Harlan returned to the security station of Blackwood Creek Psychiatric Hospital, his mind in chaos, like a soldier entering a battlefield he knew he couldn't win. The E.V. etched marble sat in his pocket, heavy as a curse, and Eleanor's childlike drawing with its crying girl and Albright's syringe burned in his mind. The Gothic building seemed more alive than ever, its cold gray stone walls seeping icy breath, the air thick with old disinfectant and a sickly sweet blood scent from the vent. As if the building bled, the temperature dropped to 3 degrees Celsius. But the cold Frank felt wasn't from autumn, it seeped into his bones. Like an invisible hand squeezing his chest, making each breath sharp and painful. The drawing in marble lay on the desk before him, heavy as pieces of a curse. And Albright's image, his sharp face and hollow black eyes, burned in Frank's mind. The Glock at his waist was useless, and the military flashlight, though bright, couldn't dispel the darkness crawling from Blackwood Creek's corners. Frank was no longer just a night guard, he'd become a truth seeker, drawn into Eleanor and Albright's story like a moth to a flame. After finding the marble and drawing, he'd spent his day off digging deeper into Arthur Albright, using his old phone and laptop at home. The library's articles provided clues, but he needed more. He found online medical history archives, websites about 20th century asylums, and academic papers on brutal treatments. Albright emerged clearly not just a doctor but a fanatic, a mad scientist believing pain healed the soul. Frank read about Albright's methods: electroshock without anesthesia, making patients scream until voiceless; experimental lobotomies, cutting brain parts to cure delusions, often fatal or crippling; and allegations of abusing young female patients, especially those admitted for rebellious behavior. A 1969 article described Albright as a man with cold eyes and steady hands, and Frank's stomach twisted imagining those hands holding a syringe. As in Eleanor's drawing in the security station, Frank opened his laptop, its blue light illuminating his exhausted, panicked face. He found a rare black and white photo of Albright on a medical archive site, a tall, gaunt man with a sharp face, black eyes like pits and a smug half-smile. Frank zoomed in, and for a moment, those eyes seemed to stare through the screen. "Through time, monster," he whispered, his voice trembling, clutching the marble in his pocket to remind himself Eleanor was real. Not a hallucination, he scribbled in his notebook, his writing shaky. Albright, electroshock, brain surgery, female patient abuse. Died mysteriously, room 213, 1968. Linked to Eleanor Vance, he recalled Abernathy's words. Albright did something, binding their souls to the stone walls. Frank's hair stood on end, as if the building confirmed it through the walls. He stood, sweeping the flashlight around the station, its white beam hitting cracks like scars. The blood scent from the vent was stronger, sickly sweet and gruesome, and Frank covered his nose, coughing. Feeling someone behind him, he spun. But only darkness writhed under the beam. The clock read 1 a.m. And the speaker whispered soft but clear, "He's coming." Frank collapsed into the chair, trembling hands holding Eleanor's drawing, its girl's eyes seeming to blink, pleading from the past. He knew Albright wasn't just a cruel doctor, he was the curse's center. And Eleanor, his final victim, was bound to Blackwood Creek forever. Frank felt he stood before a dark door, and opening it might drag him to hell. But he couldn't stop on October 18, 2025. Frank Harlan sat in the security station, the dim yellow ceiling light highlighting deep lines and dark circles under his obsessed eyes. The Gothic building seemed to close in, its cold gray stone walls seeping icy breath, the air thick with old disinfectant and a sickly sweet blood scent. As if the building bled, the temperature dropped to 2 degrees Celsius. But the cold wasn't from autumn. An invisible hand seemed to squeeze his chest, each breath sharp and painful. Eleanor's drawing and EV. Marble lay on the desk, heavy as curse fragments, and Albright's sharp face with hollow eyes burned in his mind. The Glock and flashlight were useless against what was happening. Frank had pieced together the fragments from records, articles, and Abernathy's tales, and Eleanor Vance's story emerged starkly, like a horrific painting drawn in blood and pain. Eleanor wasn't insane, she was a 16-year-old girl, sent to Blackwood Creek in 1968 for rebellious behavior, likely justifying her parents or rejecting an arranged marriage. As many girls were back then, but she fell into the hands of Dr. Arthur Albright, a fanatic with brutal therapies, electroshock without anesthesia, making patients scream until voiceless, experimental lobotomies, slicing brain parts to cure delusions, often leading to death or permanent damage, and whispered allegations of abuse against young female patients. Eleanor became Albright's special interest, locked in room 213, the isolation wing for dangerous patients, and her childlike drawing was her final plea, scratched out with trembling pencils before vanishing that fateful December night in 1968. Frank opened his laptop, its blue glow illuminating his face. Highlighting panic mixed with empathy, he reread his notes, trembling hands stroking Eleanor's drawing, imagining her final night, bare footsteps pounding down Wing C's corridor, screams tearing through the air as Albright pursued, and a horrific boom, perhaps the metal bed crashing in her desperate struggle. "She tried to escape," Frank whispered, his voice breaking in the dark. But she didn't make it. Abernathy's words echoed. Albright did something, binding their souls to the stone walls. Frank's hair stood on end, as if the building confirmed the tale through its whispers from the speaker. He's coming. Run. The whispers grew clearer, no longer faint but desperate, like a young girl pleading from a trapped, timeless place. He stood, clutching the drawing tightly, and swept the flashlight around the security station, its white beam illuminating wall cracks like scars of the past. The blood scent from the vent was thicker, sickly sweet and gruesome, as if Eleanor bled somewhere within the building. Frank felt a strange connection to her, not just fear, but deep empathy, as if his PTSD, with its memories of wounded and dying comrades, resonated with Eleanor's pain. She wasn't crazy, he muttered, voice trembling. She just wanted freedom. He thought of his own daughter, only 12, and the idea of a girl like Eleanor tortured in that cold room made his stomach churn. A mix of rage and sorrow surging within the clock read 2 a.m. And the whispers from the speaker grew urgent, like a warning. He's coming. Run. Frank collapsed into the chair, trembling hands scribbling in his notebook. Eleanor Vance, 16, Albright's victim. Footsteps are her running, whispers are her plea. Albright bound her soul to room 213. Writing brought slight relief, as if piecing the story gave him purpose. But the fear lingered. The building wasn't just recounting Eleanor's tale. It was pulling him into it. He stared at the drawing, the girl's eyes seeming to blink under the dim yellow lamp, and Frank knew he couldn't run. Eleanor was calling, and Albright was waiting. In Blackwood Creek's shadows on October 19, 2025, Frank Harlan sat in the security station of Blackwood Creek Psychiatric Hospital, the dim yellow ceiling light casting deep lines and dark circles on his face. Now not just exhausted but consumed by obsession and empathy. The Gothic building seemed to close in tighter, its cold gray stone walls seeping icy breath, the air thick with old disinfectant and a sickly sweet blood scent. As if the building bled from invisible cracks, the temperature dropped to 1 degree Celsius. But the cold Frank felt wasn't from autumn, it came suddenly, deadly, spreading from Wing C like an invisible wave, making his breath from thick white clouds, his skin prickling and numb as if touched by a corpse. Eleanor's childlike drawing and the EV marble lay on the desk, heavy as curse fragments. And her story, a young girl tortured and lost in room 213, now felt not just a past tragedy, but a living reality. Pulling him into its vortex, the supernatural presence grew stronger. As if piecing together, the story had awakened something deep within the building. Frank stood, trembling hands gripping the military flashlight, its white beam sweeping the main corridor. But as he neared the stairs to Wing C, the temperature plummeted from a normal chill to a deadly cold. Like stepping into a freezer, his breath was visible, thick and swirling like tiny spirits before Wing C's entrance. The cold intensified, his skin numbing, fingers stiffening until he could barely grip the Glock at his waist. "Damn it," he whispered, voice shaking, sweat freezing on his forehead. The cold wasn't natural, it was like a deathly hand choking him, seeping into his bones, reminding him of Iraq's desert nights when cold mingled with the fear of death. Frank entered Wing C's corridor, the flashlight sweeping peeling tiles, and the cold grew fiercer before room 213 temperature dropping below 0 degrees Celsius. Like an invisible wall, his breath forming tiny ice crystals glinting under the beam. He touched the heavy steel door, its metal burning cold, making him recoil. His skin red and raw, "Eleanor," he whispered, voice breaking in the dark like a plea, and from a distant speaker, a whisper replied, "He's coming." So cold, Frank's hair stood on end, as if the cold was Eleanor's pain, her torture in that room. Trapped in Albright's deadly chill, he stepped back, trembling hands scribbling in his notebook back at the station. Sudden temperature drop in Wing C. Before room 213, cold like a deathly hand. Tied to Eleanor, he collapsed into the chair, clutching his chest to dispel the lingering cold, and stared at Eleanor's drawing, her eyes seeming to cry in that chill under the dim lamp. Frank knew the supernatural presence wasn't a hallucination, it was growing stronger, as if Eleanor was pulling him in to finish her story. To free her from Albright's curse, the clock read 3 a.m. 3 hours until dawn, but Frank sat huddled. The deadly cold from Wing C a warning the building was alive, and Eleanor was waiting for him to face it on October 20th, 2025. Frank Harlan sat in the security station, the dim yellow ceiling light highlighting deep lines and dark circles. Now not just exhausted but consumed by obsession, empathy, and a near-mad resolve, the Gothic building seemed to awaken around him. Its cold gray stone walls seeping icy breath, the air thick with old disinfectant and a sickly sweet blood scent. As if bleeding from invisible cracks, the temperature dropped below 0 degrees Celsius. The deadly cold from Wing C spreading like an invisible wave, making his breath from thick white clouds, his skin prickling and numb as if touched by a corpse. Eleanor's drawing, EV. Marble lay on the desk, heavy as curse fragments. And her story, a young girl tortured and lost in room 213, now felt like a living reality. Pulling him into its vortex asterisk, Frank decided he could no longer hide. He sat glued to the black and white camera screens, zooming on room 213. Like a soldier on patrol awaiting the enemy, the clock read 2 a.m. Its ticking steady like a predator's heartbeat. And the speaker whispered soft but persistent, "He's coming." So cold. Frank gripped the chair's armrests, nails digging into cracked leather. And the cold from Wing C spread to the station, numbing his fingers. Then suddenly, the camera feed for room 213, previously just light static and an empty room, changed. For a moment, the static cleared like an invisible veil lifting, and Frank saw a young girl in a soiled white hospital gown, curled in the corner, knees to chest, tangled hair hiding part of her face. Terror surged, nearly toppling him from the chair, his heart pounding like war drums. Sweat freezing despite the deadly cold, the girl Eleanor, he was certain, stared into the camera with horrified eyes, wide and tear-filled, mouth open in a silent scream. Her pale face bruised as if from brutal treatments. The image lasted 1 second, vivid, alive, like a film from the past, then vanished, the screen reverting to static. The room empty as if nothing happened. Frank froze in fear, trembling hands touching the screen, as if to pull her back. But only cold static remained. "Eleanor," he whispered, voice breaking, and the speaker replied, "Help me. He's coming." Frank frantically checked the camera recording, hands shaking so much the mouse slipped, but the video showed only static, no girl, as if she existed only in that fleeting moment he saw. "It's not real," he muttered, voice trembling. But he knew it was a lie. Eleanor's eyes, full of pain and pleading, pierced his soul. Matching her drawing and Abernathy's tailies, the deadly cold from Wing C intensified, enveloping the station like a warning, making him huddle. Clutching his chest to dispel the numbness, he scribbled shakily in his notebook. Eleanor's figure on room 213, camera curled in corner. Terrified eyes vanished after 1 second. No recording. He sat huddled in the dark, the cold like a deathly hand choking him. And Eleanor's image lingered, a reminder she wasn't just a victim, but a living soul, pleading from a trapped past. The clock read 3 a.m., 3 hours until dawn. But Frank knew he had to face her. Eleanor was waiting. And Albright was laughing in Blackwood Creek shadows. Asterisk on October 21, 2025, Frank Harlan sat in the security station. The dim yellow ceiling light casting deep lines and dark circles. Now not just exhausted but consumed by obsession, empathy, and a near-mad resolve. The Gothic building tightened its grip. Its cold gray stone walls seeping icy breath. The air thick with old disinfectant and a sickly sweet blood scent. As if bleeding from invisible cracks, the temperature dropped below -1 degrees Celsius. The deadly cold from Wing C spreading like an invisible wave, making his breath from thick white clouds, his skin prickling and numb as if touched by a corpse. Eleanor's drawing and EV. Marble lay on the desk, heavy as cursed fragments, and her camera image curled in room 213, with terrified eyes burned in his mind. An unhealing wound. Frank knew he couldn't keep avoiding it. The long nights of footsteps, whispers, and deadly cold had pushed him to his limit. He felt a strange, empathetic bond with Eleanor, as if her pain, young girl tortured and bound to this building by Albright, resonated with his PTSD, his memories of fallen comrades and helplessness before death. "She needs help," he whispered, voice hoarse, stroking the drawing as if to comfort a lost soul. He decided tonight he wouldn't just guard, he'd face it. Go to Wing C, enter room 213, and try to talk to Eleanor. Though the thought made him shudder, he prepared his high-powered flashlight, new lithium batteries, its white beam like a torch, and a small military recorder to capture any sounds. Though skeptical of the supernatural, he also carried a small silver cross, a gift from his mother before Iraq. Despite not believing in God since the war, the clock read 2:30 a.m. and the speaker whispered, urgent, desperate, "He's coming. Help me." Frank stood, gripping the flashlight and recorder, the Glock at his waist like a final talisman. He left the station, heavy boots echoing on peeling tiles. Each step a challenge to the building. The deadly cold intensified as he climbed to the second floor, his breath white and thick, like stepping into a living freezer. Before Wing C's entrance, the cold choked him, forcing a cough, but he pressed on, the flashlight sweeping the empty corridor, its white beam hitting cobweb-covered patient room doors. Before room 213, the cold peaked below -5 degrees Celsius, his skin numb, fingers stiffening until he could barely turn the rusted key. The screeching lock echoed like a tortured scream, and Frank stepped inside, the flashlight sweeping the cramped room empty. Just the heavy metal bed, fresh scratches like desperate claw marks, and old bloodstains on the walls like paint abstracts. The air was icy, like a tomb, the stench of decay sweet, gruesome, mixed with old disinfectant hitting him like a fist. Making him cough violently, he activated the recorder, voice trembling, "Eleanor, it's Frank. I know what happened to you, Albright. What did he do?" The cold tightened, his breath forming ice crystals, and the speaker replied, "He's so cold, the syringe. Help me." Frank sat on the icy floor, placing the flashlight beside him, its white beam illuminating the blood-stained walls. He pulled out the drawing, stroking it, and whispered, "I'll help you, Eleanor. Tell me." The cold choked him like a deathly hand. But he didn't run. This was the last night he could endure. And Eleanor was waiting for him to face the truth. The clock read 3 a.m., but time seemed to stop. And the building whispered louder, promising release or an eternal curse. On October 21, 2025, Frank Harlan stood before room 213 in Wing C, clutching his high-powered flashlight and recorder. The Glock at his waist a final talisman, and the silver cross in his pocket a faint hope. The Gothic building tightened its grip, its cold gray stone walls seeping icy breath. The deadly cold from the room spreading like an invisible wave, making his breath from thick white clouds, his skin numb as if touched by a corpse. The temperature plunged below -5 degrees Celsius, his fingers stiffening until he could barely turn the rusted key. And the stench of blood, sweet, gruesome from the door's cracks was like the room bleeding. His heart pounded like war drums, sweat freezing on his brow. But he didn't retreat his bond with Eleanor. Empathy for her tortured soul drove him here. On the last night he could bear, Frank turned the key, the lock's screech echoing like a silent scream from the past, and pushed the door open. The flashlight swept the cramped room, illuminating the heavy metal bed, fresh scratches like desperate claw marks, and old bloodstains like painted abstracts. The air was icy, like a tomb, the stench of decay sweet, gruesome, mixed with old disinfectant hitting him like a punch, making him kneel, coughing violently. Suddenly, the heavy steel door slammed shut behind him with a horrific boom, shaking the room. He spun, yanking the handle, but it was locked tight not by wind, but as if an invisible hand trapped him. Like Eleanor once was, terror surged, his heart pounding chaotically, sweat freezing despite the choking cold. "Damn it!" he yelled, voice breaking, pounding the steel door. But it was futile. The metal burned cold, its echo like Albright's hoarse laugh from the past. He turned, sweeping the flashlight, its white beam hitting writhing dark corners, and activated the recorder, hands shaking. "Eleanor." "It's Frank. I'm here to help." "What did Albright do?" The cold tightened like a deathly hand choking him, forcing him to kneel, his breath white and thick. The recorder caught a whisper faint but clear. "He's so cold. The syringe. Help me." Frank felt his hair stand on end, as if Eleanor was beside him, curled in the corner like her camera image. He pulled out the drawing, stroking it under the flashlight, its crude lines seeming alive, her eyes blinking, mouth screaming silently. "I know your story, Eleanor Albright. He was a monster. You tried to escape, didn't you?" "The footsteps." "That was you." The room responded, the cold, like an invisible hand brushing his shoulder. Icy yet gentle, like a lost soul's thanks. Suddenly, Eleanor's piercing scream erupted, agonizing, like a knife slicing flesh, making Frank clutch his ears, collapsing to the floor, heart pounding like war drums. The scream wasn't from the speaker, but the room itself, echoing from the stone walls, as if Eleanor screamed beside him. "No. Please don't." Frank felt the cold choke him, and Albright's brutal voice laughed hoarse, cold. "You'll stay with me forever. Pain is the key." The temperature froze, his skin numb, barely able to move, and shadows flickered under the flashlight. Albright's tall figure with a gleaming syringe, and Eleanor's small form running frantically. Tangled hair, soiled gown, they danced on the walls, like puppets in a horrific play. And Frank felt he was witnessing Eleanor's final night, her desperate escape, Albright's pursuit, her screams tearing the air at the climax. An invisible force slammed the metal bed, flipping it with a horrific boom that nearly crushed him, the metal crashing against the floor, shaking the room. Frank rolled away, yelling, "Stop!" But the force, like Albright's hand, was relentless, and a sharp pain stabbed his shoulder like a syringe piercing. In that horrific moment, Frank screamed her name. "Eleanor, I know what happened. Albright tortured you, trapped you here. I'm here to help. Let me free you." His voice broke, mixed with fear and empathy. And Eleanor's soul seemed to cry through him, her pain seeping into his body, the cold like electroshocks. Her screams like brain cuts. He knelt, huddled on the icy floor, the flashlight rolling, illuminating blood-stained walls. And the building whispered louder, promising release or an eternal curse. His watch read 3:30 a.m., but time froze. And Frank knew he was reliving Eleanor's hell. Trapped in room 213 to face Albright's monster after Frank screamed Eleanor's name and recounted her tragedy, his voice breaking. Torn between fear and empathy, like a plea from a shattered heart, the supernatural activity stopped abruptly. Eleanor's piercing scream silenced, Albright's brutal voice dissolved like smoke, and the deadly cold gripping the room faded, like morning mist dispelled by sunlight. Silence returned, but this time it was peaceful. No longer heavy or menacing, as if the Gothic building had exhaled a long sigh of relief after years bound by a curse. The steel door creaked softly, and Frank, still huddled on the icy floor, hands numb, tried the handle. It opened easily. As if never locked, he staggered to his feet, flashlight trembling, its white beam illuminating the now empty room, the scratches and bloodstains seeming to fade under the light. Frank stumbled out, exhausted but relieved, as if an invisible weight had lifted. He staggered down Wing C's corridor, the deadly cold gone, replaced by autumn's chill seeping through broken windows. The blood stench faded, giving way to damp earth and rotting leaves from the forest outside, as if the building returned to its lifeless state. Back at the security station, he collapsed into the cracked leather chair, trembling hands shutting off the recorder and checking it captured the screams and whispers. Proof it wasn't a hallucination. At dawn, as faint light filtered through broken windows, casting weak rays on peeling tiles, Frank called manager Bob. Voice hoarse but firm. "I'm done this place. It's not for the living." He believed he'd freed Eleanor's soul by acknowledging her pain, screaming her name, and recounting her tragedy. He'd broken Albright's curse. Frank left Blackwood Creek for the last time, driving his old Ford truck down the winding forest road. Autumn sunlight filtering through blazing red oak leaves like a farewell. On the drive, he heard a faint whisper in the wind, "Thank you," but dismissed it as a final hallucination, an echo of a nightmare ended. At his cramped apartment in the town's outskirts, he collapsed on the worn sofa, sleeping deeply, dreamlessly. For the first time in weeks, in the days that followed, he found new work, a mundane daytime job, enough to live, and tried rebuilding his life, seeing his daughter more, sharing laughter and hugs that eased the lingering horror. He told Sarah about the nightmare at the old hospital, without details, believing it was over. Eleanor freed, Albright defeated, Blackwood Creek a distant memory. In January 2026, Frank Harlan had settled back into normal life in his cramped urban apartment, piecing things together after Blackwood Creek. He found a new job driving a delivery truck by day, enough to pay bills, and saw his daughter regularly. Their weekend afternoons filled with laughter and warmth, easing the scars of the past. He even started therapy for his Iraq PTSD, mentioning the hospital nightmare as part of his healing. But sleep eluded him, long nights staring at the ceiling, eyes shadowed, feeling watched from dark corners, from cracks in his apartment walls like those at Blackwood. One night, as the clock struck 3 a.m., Frank jolted awake to a familiar sound from the hallway outside his bedroom. Bare footsteps, slow, dragging on the wooden floor. A soft slap. Slap like Eleanor's desperate run in Wing C. He sat up, heart pounding, sweat freezing, and listened. The footsteps grew closer, joined by a faint whisper. "Frank, help me." Terror surged, hands trembling as he grabbed the Glock from the nightstand. Flashlight sweeping the room, no one. Just writhing darkness under the trembling beam, but the footsteps didn't stop. Dragging outside his bedroom door like a deadly invitation, Frank realized a horrific truth. He hadn't freed Eleanor. He'd only drawn her attention, bringing the curse home. Her soul, bound by Albright's curse, had followed him from Blackwood Creek, seeking a new guardian. Blackwood Creek never let go of those who heard its echoes. He'd become its eternal night guard, bound to her pain. The dragging footsteps growing closer, the whisper echoing in his mind like an inescapable curse. Frank sat huddled in the dark, staring at the bedroom door creaking open slowly. And the final whisper, "Frank, stay with me forever."